Good morning on this Sunday, November 20th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Georgia loses a political giant with the passing of House Speaker David Ralston. Also fresh from his win, Governor Brian Kemp is now trying to help Herschel Walker defeat Senator Raphael Warnock in the runoff. And Gwinnett County school leaders answer to critics of its new discipline policy. Melita, Phil, and Martha are all here. Jason Carter is back filling in for Theron. Welcome.
Thank you. The
debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Well, tributes from all over the country are pouring in after the death of House Speaker David Ralston, who was known as a great leader with a kind heart for the state's most vulnerable.
This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed.
As Speaker of the House, David Ralston presided over some of the most important votes in Georgia history. He pushed for lawmakers to repeal the state's antiquated citizens arrest law and pass a hate crime statute after the horrific murder of Ahmaud Arbery in 2020. This past session, Speaker Ralston was the driving force behind Georgia's Mental Health Parity Act, which requires health insurance companies to cover mental health and substance abuse treatments just like those for physical ailments. Theron Johnson calls David Ralston a friend both in politics and in life.
If you just look at the way that he's governed, I mean, you're going to see as many Democrats, if not just the same as Republicans, come out and just share personal stories like I'm sharing today about how the speaker would be honest with them about legislation, how he had an open door policy, how he was willing to push back on members of his own party if he felt like something was right.
State Representative John Burns, who will take over as Speaker of the House this next legislative term, he released a statement saying in part, quote, "As a leader, Speaker Ralston was selfless and brave, always willing to place the good of Georgians ahead of his own personal gain." Martha, I'll begin with you this week because in a way this seems so sudden.
It does seem sudden because we had really just heard a couple of weeks ago that he was not going to seek the speakership. But I tell you, my favorite story about David Ralston was that when I ran for Congress in 2012, of course, he was supporting Doug Collins because Doug was in the legislature at that point in time. But I called him, of course, as you do, and because we've been friends for a long time since before he ran for Attorney General. And he said, you know, Martha, I can't support you, but I'm going to give you 10 names of people you can call to ask for money and tell them I said to call. So he did his way of being able to help me, even though he didn't 100% support me.
That's a great story. Jason, you were a state senator. I think the one remarkable thing is that many Democrats in the House were very loyal to Speaker Ralston.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, he was one of those unique politicians who did really good things. You know, I think the last time I was on this show, we talked about the incredible bipartisan support for mental health, which is something that's been so important to my family, that he really stood up and drove. But he also, I think, got a huge amount of credit over the last several decades for stopping, not just doing good, but stopping a lot of bad. And that was something that, you know, we sort of joked that, you know, he's got this big heart, he's got this remarkable policy mind. He was also sort of a really good zookeeper, right? Like he kept folks in line, he was able to do that, and we all respected that. And that's a really big deal. And, you know, it's going to be really important, I think, going forward for this state. It's a really incalculable loss. Great guy, lots of respect, really difficult shoes to fill in both of those aspects.
Yes, I think that was a good way of saying it. I said he's kind of the patriarch down there and keeps the kids in line.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Phil.
Yeah, I think that's important, what all of you are saying, that he was the referee and he did, as you say, keep the kids in line. He was a great speaker. Wasn't as conservative as I am. I know you're a little surprised at that, but he was a straight talker, which I appreciated. He said, Phil ain't going to pass, or Phil, yeah, that'll pass, or Phil, that should be amended. And he was a great source as a journalist. I knew him when I was at Augusta Chronicle, and he would tell me what was going on in the inner circle. I actually wrote him a check in 1998 when he ran for Attorney General, so he always appreciated that. But you could go down memory lane with so many things. You're right, Jason, mental health bill was big. Of course, I like the election integrity bill that we shepherded through, which I think made elections a lot better.
Melita, I know that the speaker didn't always agree with you on issues, but he also would reach out to you.
He wrote beautiful thank you notes. And I think what Jason said about stopping the bad legislation, Jeff Graham of Georgia Equality noted that not a single LGBTQ bill that was dismissive and discriminatory passed while he was speaker. And then the Lukovich cartoon on Thursday of the figure of the speaker reaching across to the next line, and St. Peter saying that he was bipartisan was just a lovely image. And two examples of that are, you mentioned the 1998 statewide run. Both Speaker Ralston and Mary Margaret Oliver lost statewide runs in '98, and then in 2002 they both returned to the House. And last year, Speaker Ralston named Mary Margaret the chair of the Martok Committee, and he had her co-pilot that mental health bill. So he could work bipartisan, and he also respected people. Stacey Evans shared that in 2012, when she was about to deliver her first child by a scheduled induction, he allowed her to tape her statement, and it was played during the debate while she was delivering her child.
All right, well, Phil, back to you to talk about the selection of John Burns as the next Georgia House Speaker. He had the backing of Ralston's closest allies. Members rejected Barry Fleming, who would have been the more conservative choice.
Well, I think that's a fair assessment, but I think you're going to see the caucus come together. John Burns, like Speaker Ralston, listens to everybody. I've watched him over the years, and he's very accessible, and so I think everything's going to be fine. And of course, the good news for maybe conservatives, it's kind of tough to call people liberals and conservatives in the Republican caucus, but you've got maybe perhaps a more conservative state Senate, and so when they negotiate, that'll be pressure from, if you want to call them, the conservatives on the House side.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted, call a spade a little bit. It's a direct repudiation of Fleming. And it is Brian Kemp and the Republicans realizing that at this point they need to govern from the center right and not from the far right like Phil would want. Well, that's how I read it.
Well, that's really great for the next issue we're discussing, because they may or may not take this up, but Republicans are taking a wait-and-see approach after Fulton County Judge Robert McBurney overturned Georgia's ban on abortion starting around 6 weeks into a pregnancy. And Melita, Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr pursuing an immediate appeal.
Yes, he is pursuing an immediate appeal, and traditionally, the Judiciary Committee, which is predominantly served by attorneys from both sides of the aisle, has traditionally backed off new legislative initiatives which are under court review while the court review is underway. So I think on both sides of the aisle, it's expected that the legislature will not act until the court process is completed. But I thought McBurney's opinion was very well written, and not only did he highlight the void nature of the bill when it was written, but he also talked about the importance of privacy.
Martha.
Well, I think that this morning on my program we had Representative Will Wade, and he indicated that they're probably going to wait until this all plays out before they do anything. But the important parts of the bill, the personhood amendments, those kinds of things, the personhood parts, that was upheld. So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. I think that, I don't know if I buy all of the arguments that the judge put in there related to Roe v. Wade was in place, because there also was another decision that said that states do have a reason to put some limitations in, and then ultimately Dobbs came along. So I think we're still in flux on this particular situation, but for me, the fact that the personhood parts of this bill stood up is very important.
What about that issue, the personhood parts of the bill?
Well, I think, you have a bill that had a variety of aspects to it, right? But it was also passed, I think what we can all agree on with respect to McBurney's opinion is it was passed in a different legal environment, right? And one in which people weren't sure whether they were going to have to actually live with the consequences of this bill or not. And what you're going to see when the legislature takes it up again, I think, is a different and more robust discussion about how people really want to live in this post environment, right? And the Republicans are going to have to confront the fact that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. The states have this responsibility. It's a heavy responsibility, and it's not as easy as the political posturing that people have been able to get away with before. They're going to have to confront the issues.
And I think it's just one final thing. It's really important to look at the Dobbs decision as it relates to this if we go forward with anything, because Dobbs, whether it might not have been as far as I want it to go, Dobbs is a more reasonable kind of approach because it's a first trimester approach to abortion. I'm not saying that's where it's going to end up, but I think you have to look at Dobbs to be able to kind of understand where all this is going to go.
And Phil, after McBurney's ruling, Planned Parenthood said their phone started ringing again.
Well, right, and this kind of goes back to the discussion that we're having having right now, where's the reasonable compromise? I mean, is it 6 weeks like in the so-called heartbeat bill? Is it now back to 22 weeks is what's happening temporarily right now? With the legislature at some point, they're not going to do it now, but at some point have to readdress this. Or maybe, and McBurney has been reversed before, I'm not sure, I've talked to attorneys that aren't sure about his reasoning about this was done before Roe v. Wade. So we'll have to see if McBurney's reversed too.
All right, we'll leave it there, folks. Well, coming up, now that his race is over, Governor Brian Kemp is now stumping with Herschel Walker. We'll discuss.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
It was a first for Governor Brian Kemp, a campaign rally with Republican Senate hopeful Herschel Walker. Phil, over to you first in this block. This was unusual, but are you surprised?
No, I thought that the Republicans would come together. The center-right, as Jason likes to call it. I'm so happy that the center-right will be coming together. Let's put all this in perspective. Thanksgiving is going to mess this up for both parties. It's going to be turnout. Who gets the base out? It's December 6th. It's going to be tough after you get through Thanksgiving and then try to get people out. But the good news is, as I said last week, you'll have some others coming in. I think Ron DeSantis will be coming in. I hope he goes to the suburban areas because he's great. He's a rock star now in the Republican Party. He pulls out that suburban vote. Brian Kemp, I mean, what, 7-point victory there? He's turning over his machine. Nine? Okay, thanks. Even more so. He's turning over his machine. I think it'll be close.
Jason, given the popularity of Governor Kemp, who beat Stacey Abrams by 9 points, does this worry Democrats that the governor's kind of handing over his playbook?
Well, the problem is the governor doesn't get to hand over his record, and the governor doesn't get to hand over a lot of his fact that he stood up to Trump, the things that made him attractive in the general. The governor didn't get to hand that over. A ton of folks, I think, held their nose, voted for Herschel Walker for a minute. Those folks aren't going to show up to vote for him again. The Senate is not at issue. There's no reason for Republicans to come out and vote for Herschel Walker. Warnock is going to be motivating for Democrats. Walker is going to be motivating for Democrats, and I just don't think Republicans want to have Herschel Walker for 6 years to deal with. Even Brian Kemp doesn't want that.
Well, now that the balance of power is not at stake, Martha, I mean, how does Herschel Walker get his supporters out?
Look, with all due respect to my friend here, I think it's going to be problems for both sides getting their voters back out because the Senate is not in play. We just got the new numbers over the weekend of what the turnout was. African American turnout in the midterm was lower. Hispanic turnout was lower. White turnout was about even. It was 0.4 difference. So getting those people back out, and I've talked to a lot of folks, Democrats and Republicans, that are not the people that show up at rallies, okay? They're the people that just go out to vote. And I can't tell you how many of them said, I'm just not going to vote, I've had it. Now, we've got to change that. We've got to get the vote out. We've got to do those kinds of things. And you've seen Kelly Loeffler put a big buy-in on radio stations across the state to try to get the vote out on the conservative side. But I don't think it's fair to say Democrats are energized and Republicans are not.
Melita?
Well, Warnock has 900 people on the ground. There are other groups bringing people into Georgia to canvass. And you have to remember that in 2021, Warnock and Ossoff won with 200,000 voters who did not vote in the general but came out for the runoff. So Warnock knows how to win a runoff game. The other thing is that even though the control of the Senate is not in play, there are many parliamentary reasons for Democrats to put the pedal to the metal and try to get that 51st senator elected.
Phil, former President Donald Trump announced, of course, this week that he will be running again in 2024. Many Republicans were hoping that he would have waited until after the Senate runoff. What type of impact does this have?
Well, I'll address that, but I do think Melita's making a good point on the 50-50 Senate versus the 51-49 Senate. I think Republicans should be motivated. They don't like Biden. The polls show that. Warnock is just a Biden puppet. But when it's 50-50, the committees are split, and the Democrats can't subpoena like they always do. So I think it is important for Republicans to remember that. But to your point, I think everybody should be coming in. I think, if the Trump folks like Herschel Walker, that's wonderful. He's endorsed by Trump. If the DeSantis Republicans like him, if the Kemp Republicans
together,
they are. I believe we are. I believe we are.
In one place.
And you know what? The Kemp and and Walker rallied just yesterday on Saturday. But I think the great unifier is Joe Biden and the Biden puppet Warnock.
Well, Melita, something that you have said on this show before, Senator Warnock is now accusing Herschel Walker of crossing the line when it comes to his family.
Yes. And I think Herschel Walker is hardly a paragon of parenthood who should be telling anyone about how to raise their children. Senator Warnock has custody of his children. They live with him. And I mean, he said they live with him. I'm not sure how the custody arrangement works because it's sealed. But I do think that Walker is certainly not the person who needs to be going after anybody about their parenting skills.
Martha?
Well, look, I pride myself on being bipartisan and being a conservative, but to think that Herschel Walker crossing a line after the $150 million worth of ads that say, I'm Raphael Warnock and I approve this message about all kinds of things related to this. I think that unfortunately Reverend Warnock opened this door to the kind of awful things that were said, and not just things that Herschel Walker said in his interview in 2009. Look, I don't like either one of them at this point related to how they're talking about each other's families, and I think Reverend Warnock opened the door.
This campaign, Jason, really delved into the personal lives of both of these men.
Well, it did, except that you've got a true family person who has spent, I mean, you guys say what you want. There's facts and there's facts, right? There's people throwing stuff out there. You have Herschel Walker in his own words, in his own ways, talking about this stuff. And look, do I think this should be about people's personal lives? No, I don't. I think this should be about the fact that when you listen to Herschel Walker, when you look at what it is that he does, Brian Kemp wouldn't campaign with him until after he'd won. You know what I mean? That's not a personal issue. That's because he knows that he's not the right person for this job. And Raphael Warnock has acquitted himself incredibly well for the state of Georgia. If you want to see, Brian Kemp and Raphael Warnock cutting the ribbons on factories for the next several years, I think you'll see that. And I think that's going to be a really positive thing for the state going forward. And I think that's what people are confronted with right now.
Let me set the record straight on this misinformation and smear against Herschel Walker. The video where they have his ex-wife, Cindy Grossman, saying, he held a gun in his head and it was a bad time. Yes. How do you see that video? It's because of Herschel Walker. He and his ex-wife, Cindy Grossman, made that. And then it was deliberately and viciously edited to make him look like he's crazy. They did that because of the mental health issue. He wrote a self-help book. That was, 12, 13 years ago? Warnock right now, like you say, is now in court over a child custody and visitation case. The judge, a Democrat, by the way, is dragging it out. I think it's a disgrace. Now the ex-wife of Warnock wants him to come in and make things right. So this sanctimonious preacher has got a lot to answer for in his own family.
Jason?
To call these two things and to compare these two people, it's just not even a close comparison. And look, you can say what you want. The bottom line is Raphael Warnock has been the leader of my church, for example, for many, many years. Has he had a divorce? Yes. Does that make him disqualified to be in the Senate? No. And I think when people have compared it, when you've looked at the way he's acquitted himself in the Senate over the last several years, Georgians are proud. Georgians have absolutely are comfortable with Raphael Warnock. And I think when you see that they can put partisanship aside over the next several days, you're going to see that he's going to, I think, walk in this election.
Melita?
Well, the Republicans like to bring in these out-of-state people to prop Herschel Walker up because when Herschel Walker campaigns solo, we get gibberish on the campaign trail about vampires and werewolves, and we learn that he doesn't even know that there's early voting and has to be prompted by an aide off stage to know what dates early voting
ridiculous.
is.
That's
well,
ridiculous.
it's the truth. It happened. Both of those things happened,
exaggeration.
Phil. No, it's
and
not.
Both parties bring in people from out of state. What is that, a big sin in politics? No.
Well, it's not a sin. It's just that he has to be propped up.
He has matured as a candidate over the last 9 months.
Those people are not putting words in Warnock's mouth. Raphael Warnock is incredibly intelligent, understands issues, has been a leader in Washington, and Herschel Walker just doesn't know.
And I got to leave it there. Up next, some Gwinnett County parents have concerns about the school's new discipline policy. We'll discuss after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Well, despite some criticisms from school parents, Gwinnett County School Superintendent Calvin Watts defended his approach to discipline in an interview with the AJC. Watts said students will face consequences for bad behavior, but he's also interested in making discipline more equitable. I was going to go to Martha first, but Phil, to you first.
Well, obviously we want discipline in the schools and in the classroom. I'm afraid they've gone away from J. Alvin Wilbanks, the former superintendent's strict discipline policies. And this word equity really is a problem. What does that mean? I think we ought to have a case-by-case basis, and if someone has broken rules, then they're disciplined, like the present superintendent is saying. I don't know, as you start getting into the bean counting statistics, do we have to have white people disciplined as well as Asians and blacks? I think that's a slippery slope you're going down. Discipline people regardless of race and ethnicity if they break the rules.
Jason, hundreds of people showed up earlier this month to being focused on violence. There have been some violence. There was a murder of a student.
Look, we are all confronted with significant issues in schools. Nothing matters more to a parent than the schools where their kids go, right? That's true for me. My wife's a teacher. My kids go to my local public schools. It's the most important thing in my life, right? Where my kids go to school and what it's like for them.
And are they safe?
And are they safe? Of course. But the other piece of the puzzle, I think, in addition is, Phil mentioned Superintendent Wilbanks. You're talking about someone who was in a position for many, many, many years, had an enormous amount of credibility. It's a very difficult position to come into, and it takes some time for folks to build the kind of relationship that they have, and it's tough to do that. And so I don't envy the political situation that he's in.
Martha?
Look, there's no doubt that there's a lot of remorse about how they handled getting rid of Alvin Wilbanks. I've had a lot of people talk to me about that. I am the 9th District State Board of Education member, and this as of January 1st, this county is going to be in my district. They're not right now. So we know that there's some remorse about that. In fairness to Calvin Watts, he was part of the Wilbanks. He came up through Wilbanks. Wilbanks was a mentor. I think he's a very strong superintendent. I'm willing to give him the opportunity to see where this goes. But they're concerned because ultimately every time there's one of these discipline things that get into the court, then the State Board of Education also gets named in it. And we have to review it every day just so there's many layers is what I'm saying. I think there's an opportunity to kind of review this.
Melita, I almost compare this to criminal justice reform within the school system. It's a tough issue.
Well, it's a tough issue made tougher by the rapidly changing demographics of Gwinnett County and, as you say, the new superintendent. And I believe he's trying to have teachers in the halls when classes are being changed. He's asking teachers to check the bathrooms when they go by for things that happen there. So I think we give him the grace in Gwinnett County to settle into the job and see how his policies work.
All right, we'll be watching and discussing. Thanks, guys. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
I want to go first real quick because a viewer stopped me, a fellow Holy Innocents mom. Her name is Danae Abernathy. Huge fan of the show, loves watching us, loves everybody, and Phil, yes, even you, she loves. So over to you.
That's great.
I don't believe that.
Her dad was Joe Hextall, state representative Joe Hextall. So
Don't you hate it when people like me?
I don't believe it.
It's the hair.
it doesn't all that often.
Fair enough. I believe that. I do believe that. Go ahead, Phil.
Oh, get to do winners? Okay. Well, there's a new Republican congressman. I know you're upset about this too, Jason. There's a new Republican congressman in the legislative delegation for the state, and that's Dr. Rich McCormick. So we welcome him to Washington. And of course, we mentioned, the late Speaker David Ralston. He is a winner for a lot of the things that all of the panelists said. And I'm a winner. It's my birthday on Thanksgiving, and so happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday, you little turkey.
Yeah. That's said with love.
Of course, Jason.
Happy birthday, Phil. Happy birthday. I think for me, there's. I'm just going to talk about winners, if it's okay. I think that what you have today, elections are snapshots, and they're not narratives, and we sometimes like to talk about them as though they're stories. This election, I think, demonstrated really, for many years, you had independents, self-identified in Georgia as independents, and they voted like Republicans, and now they're voting like independents. I think that means that you're going to have opportunities out there to have discussion, have some bipartisan leadership in the state, and I think that's going to be good.
Martha.
So Pools Barbecue is going to be closing the Saturday after Thanksgiving. A place that many of us have been there. We have a pig on the hill, all that kind of stuff. So that could be a Beatles song, a pig on the hill. We could do that. But anyway, thanks to them for all the years, all the great and the great food.
And Joel McCutcheon.
Absolutely. My loser this week is going to be Reverend Warner because of that ad ran. I don't know how it's going to play out. I may have to call him a winner in a couple of weeks. I'm going to call him a loser this week. The Trump ad, he's put the whole clip in there. And then I just want to say, poll workers and people that work for election offices, they are working like 9-hour days right now. Be nice when you go in for early voting. Be nice when you go in and vote on election day.
Melita.
Amen.
Well, I'd like to make Senator John Ossoff a winner because the subcommittee investigations that he's just completed about the abuses in the Irwin County
On my list at that time.
Detention Center. And I also want to make a winner all the activists who brought this to light so that the Senate would investigate. Other winner is the fact that Georgia has become the latest state, following in the lead of 4 others, to introduce all-terrain wheelchairs in state parks, giving the handicapped access. And then
Quickly.
That's it.
Okay, all right. Y'all have a great Thanksgiving. Y'all have a great Thanksgiving. Thanks for watching. See you next week.